Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of That's Initiative. I'm your host Chris, and my co-host, as always, will be, I suppose, for episode 1. It is Greg. Hi, Greg.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Yeah. So, if you want to listen to more about the two of us, you can check out episode 0 on our YouTube channel, and that's Dice Hate on YouTube. You can find us on there if you're watching the VOD. You obviously know that already. So we're not going to spend too long talking about ourselves and our experiences. We're just going to jump straight into a topic, which this week we're going to talk about what makes a good session. We're not really looking at campaigns or one shot specifically, but just in general, come at it from quite a general overview sense, and then look at it from both a DM perspective and a player perspective, what you look for in a session. So, do you want to kick us off, Greg? Any thoughts you have on what makes for a good, enjoyable session?
From the DM's perspective, or from the player's perspective?
Just in general, what
Oh,
what
okay.
would you look for in
I
both?
think variety is the thing that I look for, both as a game master and a player. More so as a game master because I just want to make sure that everybody's getting what they're looking for out of the session. So some people prefer combat, people prefer some other things. So yeah, I think variety. You don't want to focus too much on any one thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. I know I always try to make sure, recognize when other people at the table seem to be like switching off, if like someone's taking too long on a turn or in combat, or if you're like doing a role playing session and someone else is waiting outside the room and stuff like that, like jumping around, giving people ample time, and uh, as well as a variety, trying to make sure. I know this is something that you focus on quite a lot. Is trying to manage your table time of different players when you're a GM.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It keeps up the tension. It's like reading a good book where they're weaving a bunch of stories together. You always want to get back to the story you're most interested in, which is at the table more
Your
often than
own.
not yours. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, you leave them. You make it short and concise, and then give everybody just enough time that the rest of the people don't get bored.
Yeah. So seeing as we're staying on like generics for now, what have you got an example of what your favorite session you've played in like any system?
My favorite session that
Yeah.
I've played
Well,
in
or
any session.
played or ran, I suppose. Seeing as we're coming at it from both sides, have you got something that's really memorable that stands out?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, there was a game that we ran with the old one of the older groups from the store, and it was a same thing, good combination. There was some combat and stuff like that, but there was, you know, a lot of reversals in the story, and we got, we got invested in the NPCs, and then it got taken away from us.
Oh,
So,
the,
so,
the
so
sense of loss.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a couple examples. I guess one is the like Davina and the ogre, which was always was like, and this so that's not even the funny because that has really nothing to do with me. I was just a witness to the you should be nice to the ogre because ogres don't hurt people until he decided that he would carry her off and make her his new bride, and then she's like, kill it, kill it, kill it.
Yeah, something that the pivot of the players that the GM like forces them into. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, because I
yeah.
mean, she was very adamant that this ogre was not going to do anybody harm and that we should just leave him be, but she wanted to check and make sure he was okay, and so then that just started us down the twisty path.
Yeah. So I know, not necessarily the similar like the pivot, but being put in an uncomfortable situation. I remember my friend Jono was running a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay campaign, and in a previous session, I'd been really badly mauled by a Beastman hero, and my character was basically bedridden while I was trying to heal up and like recover. And if you've played second edition Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, unless you get magical healing, which there isn't a lot of, it takes you like weeks and weeks to recover your hit points. And I basically sent out. I was playing a minor noble of a ruined house of what was it? It was Vissenland. My character was from. Um, it was originally from Solent, but because the province got destroyed, it was absorbed into Vissenland. So I was like an unlanded noble, and my family was in tatters. And I had a little squire who was a halfling, and he was like the hero of the game because every time he'd like shoot the pistol, he'd crit something and blow its head off and things. But I was just bedridden, so I'd send him out, and John O would role play this NPC going around doing the shopping. He'd just come back with like, "Oh, I found this," oh, and it's like magic weapons and like awesome shields. It's like, "Oh, it'll not need that," and it just bring me some like shandy instead to like ease my pain and like a nice hot pie instead of like all the useful magic items. And I'm like, if only I could move, but I was bedridden, so there's nothing I could do. And
I think that's a great example. Like I think we talked about it in the previous episode, but for a game master, you want to spend more time making interesting NPCs because they impact the players more than big involved preparations for encounters that the players inevitably just circumvent and that you end up having to plunk down somewhere else.
yeah, and I always find as when I'm coming at it from a GM side of it, if I put a lot of effort into the villain, I always find that the players just kill them and never interact, and it's always like the person you expect to just die ends up having to take a more prominent role, and the ones you put loads of effort into, like how are we going to react, how are we going to be character driven. So I always find that funny from the DM side, trying to put more effort into doing the NPCs who the players shouldn't attack because you get use out of them, even if you don't. If you don't interact with them in that city, you can plonk him in somewhere else.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a decent start for like just generics of a good session. So we'll come at it, I suppose, from the game master side of it now, and try and hit a few bullet points of bits of advice for people. Of if you're like planning a specific session, it doesn't have to be like a one shot or like session one, but just like generically, if you're gonna plan a session for a player, how much effort do you put into the different parts of it? Like you've already said, you want to do variety.
You mean like this for tomorrow?
I'm not looking spoilers. Oh.
Yeah, so I go through and I cover uh where the players are and where I think they will get to. So that's more so if they're traveling. But I mean, generally, I frame out the session with what I intend to get done to do, and then just sort of bulleting. I put down the things that I want to happen in the session, and they're not concrete, like as far as a certain event or something I want it to occur sometime in the session. Uh, I'll plot it where I think it'll be ideal, but often, like I said, it doesn't always work out that way. So you kind of have to monkey around with it. And then important notes. So like for instance, you guys are traveling in the session tomorrow. So I wanted to review my notes for the lands that you're traveling through, right, and stuff like that. So I just have them quick reference and so forth. If I am plotting like an adventure or something, I'll have wanted to go through and or even like an encounter like last week. So this isn't really an adventure, but a scenario, let's call it. I want to go through and have all those notes done, but I generally do those outside of the so like I've probably pre-generated 6 or 8 scenarios already. I don't know where they're going to go,
Yeah,
right?
you can just drop them in anywhere.
That's right. So
Yeah.
if you guys charge through the content that I presented, then I can go look through and find an appropriate one or something like that.
Yeah. I've got Matt Colville on Twitter at the minute. And he shared his notes from an older session, which really sparked something that was relatively similar to how I prepare. But it was when they captured the Mind Flayer ship in the game that he's running for the Chain of Acheron.
Yeah.
You can watch his stuff on Twitch and YouTube.
Yeah, that's
You
quite
put
early on.
yeah
That's like in the
yeah
fourth or fifth episode or
yeah.
something.
And something that really struck me that I thought, oh, that's really how I kind of come at it was it was his notes specifically for a Mind Flayer they encounter, and he had like specific lines of text that like, when I was watching, I don't remember him like looking down and reading the lines, but it's just to jog his. This is how I want to, or how I read it and interpret it anyway. It's like this is the feel I want for a character. So I
Yeah.
do that a lot with. If you're going to interact with any NPCs, like a shopkeeper, I'd have like the way I want this person to introduce themselves. Like, are they going to be gruff? So I'd think of the line I would want them to say, and I wouldn't necessarily read it verbatim or
Yeah.
even read it at all, but it just helps me frame that aspects of the characters, which I find really interesting. And I think that that's a really good way of framing your NPCs so that they are more memorable. Because I always find that when I was running for you guys, for example, if you'd catch me off guard with an NPC I didn't have prepared, they'd feel a little bit generic to me when I was playing them. Whereas in the ones that I'd put a bit more time in, I always felt like I knew how they would react in different situations. And that's I had little Filofax cards, which I just
Right.
bought like a pack of 200, and I'd just fill them out. I'd fill out like 10 or so of them with just generic pre-generated names and then professions, and then I'd just drop them into a session as you were trying to interact with people, and it would help me have these NPCs ready. And ultimately, it doesn't matter where they are in the world. It doesn't have to be
No.
this. You don't need 15 shopkeepers. You need one until they've met that one. Then you can make another one.
Right. You want it to appear seamless so that it's not a giveaway to your players. Oh, that they went to talk to this person and they have no information on them. So really, they don't have anything to contribute. Whereas the more zest you put into your NPCs, the more, I don't know, complete your world seems. So
Yeah,
that everybody potentially, the players get the feeling that everybody has information for them. So well, yeah, that's a good idea.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And then one thing I did pick up on from what you were saying as well was like the you clarified yourself to be like not like when the players are traveling, like where you want them to go. But I also I think you can do that even if you're in the middle of a dungeon crawl and it's like halfway through. It's like I want them to hit these 3 encounters. Or if you're doing a more role playing session, it's like I want them to level up to this point and like have time to build this magic item. Or the journey of a character on doesn't necessarily have to be a physical journey from point A to point B. It can be the growth of the character as well. So as long as you're plotting a line from one start where I want the characters to be at the end of the session, doesn't necessarily need to be at physical location.
No, no,
So,
absolutely.
and I know, like, as a I suppose from a player, I knew like at the end of the session that I was talking about with Jono, I knew that my character would be healed and like weeks would have passed in that session. So it was going to be like a time fluid session, but it I don't want to say punishment because it didn't feel like punishment, but it's like you're not doing much this session because you did these stupid things trying to fight a Beastman Lord when you're a crappy Vissenland hero who doesn't have
Well, you
any.
didn't die, right? So I mean, it didn't work out as poorly as it could have.
It, it, so Kurt Helborg threw me my Sullen Runefang, which was my family's heirloom sword before the before the province was destroyed, and I failed to pick it up. And then when I finally got it, I missed all of my attacks, and Hugh had to save me by shooting this beastman in the head with his pistol. And I just got royally tried, and it was like John. I was so disappointed at the end of the session. It's just like, damn it, Chris, that was your moment. You got to hold your family rune fang, and you were supposed to smash this beastman. I'm like, yep, yeah, I was.
Yep.
And it's memorable and was enjoyable because it went
Well,
so badly.
and
And
that's
that,
something we've talked to in previous, right? So the game master is like, wow, that was terrible. That in his mind, he feels like that didn't work out anywhere like he wanted. But from the player's perspective, it was thoroughly enjoyable. And so I mean, we've talked about this at length. So you never really know, right? Uh, if the player walks away happy, you have succeeded in
yeah,
knocking it out of the park.
I think that's always down to the player in that specific. I'm pretty sure we both know players who had they just fluffed everything and the NPC had to save them, would have been really frustrated with the session. But
Oh,
I mean, I play my character to the best of my ability. If the
well,
dice don't, yeah,
it defined your character too, moving forward.
yeah,
So yeah, like, you came out of that session with a much, I don't know, clearer idea of who your character was.
yeah. And I think it's just a good tip in general, not necessarily in regards to this topic, but just to enjoying D&D in general. I think is not how I mean. I was serving a customer today. She was starting her first ever character for a first ever D&D game, and we were chatting about it. And I was like, well, don't make a character that like as part of a group saying like, oh well, we've got the wizard, we've got a fighter, we need a healer. Who's going to play a healer? Make the character that you want to play, and you can be the best player in the world and still play a derpy character and
Yeah.
enjoy it. It doesn't matter. You just play the character as a dice roll. It doesn't matter. Like, part of the fun is like succeeding in spite of the dice or in spite of the character. Like the story will progress one way or another. That's the game master's job, and trying to enjoy that and go along for a ride sometimes.
No, absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I was thinking about, uh, like when you mentioned Colville actually made a really interesting point. I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where he was talking that he wanted the sensation that the journey they were going on was going to take some time, and so he drew it out to the point of ponderousness, and so he ignored pacing. And then in retrospect, in his campaign journal, he talked about it and he said, I could just as easily have sort of set the tone by having a narrative description of their travels, because he knew they weren't going to run into anything,
Yeah,
and they would have saved themselves like 45 minutes where the players were getting fidgety, and I mean, you can sense that in your players, and uh, it doesn't, I think at the beginning of a game, maybe you're trying to set the tone, but like once your game is going, your players recognize that just because this particular journey nothing happened doesn't necessarily mean that the next time they go from town A to town B that they're not going to get waylaid by some sort of
yeah.
baddie.
I agree. I think that's a skill you develop as a game master is when to switch to a narrative mode and when to manage it. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be a travel thing. Like there's the I know we spoke about this in the past when we've for food and crap like that. Well, it's like the old okay, so you're at the gates to a dungeon, just dropping them in and
Right.
playing like old school D&D. You don't have to always be doing narrative mode to get them to there. It can be for like my character healing. Okay, so you're bedridden for a few days. You check up on the newspapers that get delivered every day. Tell them to some stories that they see in the newspaper. You're keeping the progression of time and things still happening. And I think I did that kind of thing in the game I ran for you and Daniel, where it was like newspaper clippings were coming in, where like adventures you didn't go on were progressing without you to try and show the consequences of
Yeah.
by doing this, this has happened somewhere
A,
else. And
a sense of time passing
yeah,
within the world, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, all that pace and all that stuff, that's really important. The game master, like you said, I think as you get more comfortable, uh, that also has to do with composition. So, if you start your session, I've often heard, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but you start your session with a combat, it brings everybody to the table, like they're sort of, present. There,
yes,
it starts off the session with sort of a punch, but you don't want it to be very long. So it just wants to be something short, and then you've got everybody's attention and all that stuff. But I think there's lots of other ways to achieve it. But I
yeah.
mean, certainly from a new game master's perspective, that's a simple way to
I
to
think another good like kick off to the session's always like you've just finished your recap of like what is it the last time we left our heroes type thing, and
yeah.
then you go in if they're in a place they can buy the new stuff. That's a good way of getting everyone engaged. It's like, oh, I wanted that thing. And if you're in that type of game where like the items and the equipment is what the players care about, it's a good way of getting them back into the setting and into the game and like getting them back engaged. And if you've got a group that's more role play, starting them off with a combat might get tedious for them. But having like you'll know your own group and what you play with them, and having that kind of thing, and you don't want to do it every time, but it's a good way of like hooking them back into a game and getting
Yeah.
them engaged. I find especially if you have one of those sessions that's going to be quite not tedious, but there's a lot of information that needs to come out if you're going to progress the story in big chunks. You want something that's going to hook them in and get them engaged. If you open with that, you're going to lose people, and then they're not going to get the benefit from all of that information and the progression of the story. So, and that's always a good plan if you're going to do that type of session.
Yeah. So I think like it's composition. You just need a little bit of everything. You can't have too much exposition. You can't have too much combat. You can't have too much. Yeah, I was going to say you can't have too much role play, and maybe I'm like when I think back to some of the sessions in the past. I've had sessions where the players were at that point where they had to make a decision, and well, it was, I guess, essentially role playing. They were role playing amongst each other. And I
Yeah,
don't think you want to shut that down unless they're just going in circles. I mean, you're there to listen and to interject occasionally and stuff like that. But if they're trying to figure it out, you don't want to rush them unless that's what the scenario dictates, that they're under some sort of time constraint and so forth. But yeah, because inevitably that's the same thing. That's like you don't put your alignment on the top of your character sheet at the beginning. Well, you could, but it doesn't.
but you're cheating yourself out of exploring and learning your character.
Right. I mean, you might have an idea that, or something that that this is the way you want your character, but inevitably the act of playing the character defines who they become, and so saying, "Hey, I'm going to be this," unless something requires you to be this, right? Then you're just. I think you're right. I think you're just. You want. You can look back after 2, 3 sessions and sort of say, "Hey, you know, if I had to pick an alignment for my character based on the way I've played it, right?"
Yeah. I think this is a small tangent, but I think were I going to commit to an alignment, the only one I think I'd feel comfortable being able to make that choice every time was lawful good. I think that's a really, it's not necessarily easy in that you just do what it takes to be heroic, because being lawful good can leave people in a really bad position because you're not gonna go outside of the law to help people who need it. But I think I could commit to a lawful good character if that was where I thought they would be without feeling them out a little bit. If I
Right,
was because I kind of know, well, it's generally how you would react is going to be within the law and what the party wants to do.
right,
So as long as you're not breaking the law, it's easy.
right.
But
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think lawful good
lawful good,
is,
lawful neutral, I suppose.
yeah,
Lawful neutral is probably easier. Yeah,
lawful in general.
yeah,
I think is easier to adhere to. Um, you really have to think more so. I think that they, for most people, the chaotic nature of a character is like less. Well, we live in a civilized society, so
yeah.
the chaotic nature is more alien, I would say.
Yeah, I think the problem. This is definitely a topic we'll have to hit properly on a different episode. I think, but
Yeah.
just the problem with chaos is that it means a lot of different things to different people.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
so
Yeah, for sure.
lawful is easy, chaos is really hard. But
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
uh,
That's a
apparently,
whole topic unto itself.
yeah. So we'll leave that one alone for now.
Yeah.
You know, leave some comments on your thoughts and tell us we need to cover it. It'll be fine. But, anything else you wanted to hit from a game master game master perspective. I can
I would
speak.
I would say this. So here's one of the things you sort of you have what you want to occur in mind, and then uh, you're like, well, I feel like my session is kind of skinny. Like, like I could throw in this, I could throw in that. That is the perfect time to draw. If you feel like you need to flesh out a scenario, that's the perfect time to draw from one of your characters' backstories, because uh, it's hard to put them in on the fly. But if you're it like what I did with yours, I went through and I sort of made notes for each character on ideas, and then put them in my sort of working document. And then every time I sort of got an idea or something, I like made a notation and so forth. And then I'm just like, when I'm planning out something that I feel like, well, combat might not be right. Uh, we don't want to have a scenario like we had the previous week, because then it just feels that that's what we're doing all the time. Just to sort of break it up a little bit. This
Yeah,
might be the perfect time to throw in something, and then that's the most unpredictable for me, because I don't know how the characters will react to that, because you know depends how much forethought. Well, forethought maybe is not in the right, but how big a vision the player had when they're writing their backstory, or did they just slap a bunch of details in there?
yeah. I know. For me, when I've done like when I've felt a session's been going small, that's what different to you, where you might think about putting a combat in at the start. I've try and have like that back pocket encounter that I can drop in at any time, like being waylaid by thieves. Like you feel someone trying to lift your money belt and stuff like that.
Right.
Those kind of encounters where you can just liven up and pick up the pace, and a reason to try and move the players along, or like prod them if they need prodding. Um, and as you said, like having those encounters prepared that you can drop into any time. I don't think you. I suppose it would. My advice would be try not to make them all a combat encounter that happens on the road. Have something for an inn. Have something in your back pocket for in a marketplace, or just uh, generic situations that could happen anywhere. And like it can be something really weird that it's an actual nothing encounter, but it just puts your players on tilt. One that you did that I thought was really interesting that I don't think Jim explored that much was when the Ravens were watching him. I thought that was really interesting, and because obviously you have all of the connotations of ravens and all of that in mysticism and everything, and you can just like if you mention a detail as a GM to a player, they always think there's a reason why you mentioned it, and the reason could be because I knew it would be interesting and throw you off. It doesn't need to lead anywhere or do anything.
Right.
And I'm not saying that those will or won't. It might be part of a larger story, but ultimately, those little details you can just if your players are going around, you can mention the strange man with the hunched over physique who catches their eye and gestures, and then they go over and he's like, "Do you want to buy a watch?"
Yeah. I mean, that particular encounter with the Ravens could have gone somewhere if the player had bought into it, but
Yeah,
but he chose not to. He obviously wanted to get from wherever he was going to where he was going, and so
yeah,
I mean that's fine, right? So nothing came of it, uh, and then in retrospect, you might, as a game master, then go back and write something into it to come back later, right?
yeah,
Remember, so you're like, remember when you were in those woods so long ago and those ravens were following you around, right? What's happened again? Now it's maybe not a coincidence,
yeah,
right? And then they're thinking, right? But you just played off something I think that's why, from a game master, from my perspective, I try to keep very concise notes about what was in the session. Part of it is at the beginning, like I plot out my session in my notes, and then I add a bunch of stuff at the after the session is done when I get back. When it's still fresh in my mind, I add all the things that were of note to me, and then I can go back and reference them
Yeah.
later, right? And you never know, right? So that's what you're just looking for is inspiration. If you can find any inspiration, it takes you somewhere where you might not have originally thought.
Yeah. Okay, so moves us on nicely to cover as a player then. What do you look for if you're going to sit down at a table? What makes you feel like you've had an enjoyable session, other than killing all of the things and looting the bodies?
Um, yeah, I don't know. That's it so depends on the group you're in. Some groups are just that. They're just murder hobos and you run around and I mean that can be enjoyable if there's a interesting story, not even that involves your character, that can be really interesting. Um, yeah, so I mean I look back and at the end of the session and feel like, that didn't I find I enjoy scenarios that didn't go where I expected them to go, were somewhat unpredictable, consistently unpredictable. Let's put it that way, where they're just not disjointed and all over the place, where the game master was just losting it up by just throwing stuff in to fill in. We'll just put polar bears in the jungle because that doesn't seem like it's you know that's not. That's where you see the twists and turns, and you're like, it when you leave the table before the next session, you're actually think that it brings you to think about it, right? And that's, I guess, what I'm looking for. I find like at the end of the session, I might be like, that was kind of cool. But then, like 2 or 3 days later, if I'm still thinking about it, then obviously it had a much more of an impact on me as a player than because sometimes it's just not necessarily apparent, and then a couple days gestating on it, and you're like, oh, I didn't even think of that, right?
Yeah, yeah, I do like those slow burn things that happen in the session where it's like it's not necessarily relevant to what's happening right now, but you're like, oh, did that mean something? Did I miss that? Do I need to go back when we start again? Do we need to look into that and trying to like plan out and throw off the flow of where I expected my character to be? That's what I enjoy the most, and I feel like I always enjoy being challenged as a player to see where my character will go rather than trying to take my character where I want them to go. I find that I don't know if I'm different to most players. I try not to like my characters never have an end goal in mind really.
Right.
I'm quite wishy washy with them. I'll get them to be cool now.
You're participating in the journey that is your character.
Well, so I want them to be cool in the moment. I don't care about having a cool backstory and past. I don't care about having a cool future. I want to enjoy playing them now. And
Right.
I feel like obviously that's easier if you're playing the chaotic character that you just want to do what you want and you can be in the moment all the time. But then the game starts to like trying to challenge me to something mundane keeps happening, and I'm like, okay, this isn't what I want to be doing. And then how am I going to adapt to that? And feeling like I'm having to make decisions within character that will have a lasting impact on my character is what I feel is the most enjoyable. Um, and like when things don't necessarily work out how you would expect, or the setbacks tend to be more memorable for me, then I enjoy the I rolled a 20 and then I rolled maximum damage and the thing exploded. Those are fun stories, but the best stories are those tales of war that you you can
Yeah,
lament.
you rolled the one, and your sword flew out of your hand and went down the storm drain. and then you ended up having to punch the bandits to death,
Yeah.
right?
That's
Or
a,
just turn around and run away while they were chasing you. Yeah, so I think one of the one it all depends how much story you have embedded. Like, so some characters, you make a character, they're they're there to play. You're there to play the game. They're going to be fun to play and stuff like that. But there's maybe not a lot of story driving them. You're kind of going to generate your story from engaging with the campaign. But then there's the characters that you put a lot of sort of thought into how, before, who they were before they got to the game, and you're looking at something different out of those characters. I think that they have a story to tell,
yeah.
and whereas the like half vampire berserker might not have the same story to tell, but over the course of the game they might, that their story reveals itself, right? They're put in situations where they have to make, like you said, uncomfortable choices, and that defines who they are to you as the character. Whereas the other ones, you're bringing a bunch of stuff to the table that's going to inform the decisions that you make.
Yeah.
But either one can be quite interesting, right? And I actually, that this is kind of interesting that you made me like retrospect on this. I'm more interested in hearing the other person's story,
Yeah.
because
It's one of
inevitably I think that their story is more interesting to me, right? I know who my character is. I don't know who your character is. I'm kind of
yeah.
interesting to see how your character like turns out, right?
Yeah. That's it's one of the things I wanted to touch on of when we said about doing the backstory for your character and how deep into a backstory you go. I find that it's very easy to if you go too in depth on the backstory for your character and set them up with all of these different intrigues and give you like you want to give a game master hooks to pull from, but you want to be cognizant that there are going to be other people at the table as well, generally, unless you're playing a one-on-one game. And if you put all of these hooks in and then try and demand that they get played to, you can be like hogging the spotlight. And obviously, it's a game master's job to try and make sure that doesn't happen. But you don't want to be that player as well. Be cognizant of it. Uh, Sometimes it's okay for your character to leave his past behind in some aspects and evolve and do different things. And I felt with we chatted about the tiefling sorceress who was disguising herself as a human fighter. That there were many different aspects to that backstory where it was layers upon layers to be peeled away. But at no point when I was playing her did I try to force that into the limelight. I didn't. I was quite. If we'd have played that full campaign and I finished that campaign and everybody still thinks that I'm a human fighter, and none of my backstory that we'd wrote and thought up ever came in, I would have felt like we won.
Right. No, yeah, I think that's uh, so the difficulty, and I see this with like newer game masters and newer players. The newer players are super enthusiastic, not that more experienced players are not, but I think the more experienced player has a clearer idea of what's going to happen in a session. Um, so you get these big elaborate opuses from new players, and the new game masters struggles with table management, and it's definitely a possibility, like you said, where the the game master latches onto the most interesting one and doesn't give anybody else face time.
Yeah,
But I think you realize that, like, the first thing I did when I like made my notes, I'm like, how can I attach this character's backstory to this character's backstory? That they won't see, like, that, you know do they have anything in common? At some point, can I like draw them together so that now their story becomes twinned, and or put in something that happens that then I can then link to somebody's backstory, so that you're drawing more than one character in, and it isn't just the spotlight on like one person all the time, right? So I think but that's the same thing. The backstory thing is, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. It's a slow burn.
Yeah.
They don't all come out in the second session, and if you're you got this big elaborate thing where your relatives were murdered because something happened and all that, and the second session you like run into the dude and you kill him and throw them in the drink. uh yeah, I think that the game master is not doing that story justice,
Yeah.
right?
I think a really good example, touching on what we were saying and what you mentioned about the games master's responsibility to manage a table, would be if you look at Matt Mercer in Critical Role and the Mighty Nine campaign that we're doing. We were telling you I just started watching that one from the beginning.
Yeah.
And how he manages the everybody leave the table barring one player. Like
Sure.
you don't want to do too many of those in one session, because inevitably, if you've got 4 people at your table and you do that twice, that means 2 people left the table twice and didn't do anything for 10 minutes maybe at a time. So they've had like 20 minutes away from the table. And fair enough, in a couple of sessions' time, it might be their goal. But for this session, all they remember is that you told them to piss off for 2 sessions, like 20 minutes at a time, and not do anything effectively. So I think managing those solo parts of it where it has to be relatively secretive, I think they add value to a given extent, but you want to be cognizant of the other players that you're asking to leave with that type of thing.
So I think the technology has made this a lot better than it used to be. So before, you used to pass notes, and then everybody like, hey, what's in your note? And no, nothing, just something. And so you would ask people to leave so that you could have that interaction with them so you didn't pass a note. But so now I think that it's quite interesting with everybody having phones and tablets and stuff, that the people can be sending messages back and forth to the game master while the game is going on, and you can be responding. And so you don't have to, in a lot of cases, like if they have a simple question, but they don't want to address it with everybody else around, they can just simply text you, So I think, note to self, as a game master, turn off your ringer while you're doing it, so that everyone's like, hey, who's messaging you? But I think that that's certainly that's an advantage.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right, because people are quite understanding the first couple times, right, where they're leaving or something like that, or do it like if you're playing. Colville's another example. But when they take their break, do it then,
Yeah.
right? Or do it sometimes you do before the session, or do it after the session, or if you as the game master can time it so that it occurs at a bookend part, then you can deal with it away from while you have everybody there. Because I kind of feel like if you've got everybody at the table, that's the time you need to be most productive.
Yeah. I know. I feel like we've naturally flowed on to the counterpoints to what makes a good session and like things to watch out for. But an example of that would have been again, it was Jono running a game. It was a Dark Heresy campaign this time, and one of the players had a really secretive character. So he'd ask, "Oh, can we go in the other room?" And so him and Jono would go in the kitchen, and then there'd be like 3 of us just sat around. So and it would be 30 minutes at a time, and it'd happen multiple times a session, and eventually it's like we just don't want Baz to play anymore, because he's ruining it for everybody else because we're not getting to do anything.
Right,
So
right. And
that
that's
would be
a management. I think you can go for, 5 minutes or a couple minutes, and that if the person's asking you questions, but the like last thing you want to do is be playing out something away from the table, right? Um, Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, I've had big games, like I've DM'd for big groups, like 10 plus players, and so
mm,
inevitably that happens. And so the only solution to that was I had one of the players in my game co-DM. So when somebody wanted to go do that, that person would go off with them, and the two of them would go and talk about it,
yeah,
right? But I mean, was that's inevitable. I think if you have a game of that magnitude, but I don't know that I don't think I would ever run a game of that size ever again.
yeah. I think one way I'd try to do that, and I think I've addressed it this way in the past, is that, like I said, the first time it's fine. We'll go have 5 minutes, and if it looks like it's going to run over, it's like, okay, well, write down everything you want from this part of it, and then email it to me, or like, hand me a note at the end of the night or whatever, and then we'll cover it before the next session, and we'll have an email exchange, and we'll sort it all out, and trying to, like I said, take it out of the session so that you can use that time productively for as many of the players as possible. I think that's a
Yeah,
good way to try and
that's the
address that.
fairest way.
Yeah,
That's the fairest way to your players, because, like you said, it wasn't the game was bad, but but there was a bunch of downtime. It like broke up the flow of the game,
yeah,
and uh, yeah, it just wasn't fun. And and I think if that's an issue, and you're playing in a game like that, it's not unreasonable for you to mention it to your game master and say, hey, we don't have a problem with Bob having some secret from us, because I mean everybody has a secret, but the fact that we played for 4 hours and 90 minutes of it was spent with Bob in the kitchen, kind of more problematic, right?
yeah,
So if you and Bob want to meet on a Tuesday, when we play on Thursdays or something like that, right?
yeah.
Then you guys can play to your heart's content and come back and have your situation resolved. Yeah, then that's cool, right? But I don't think you want to do it at the table with everybody else.
So I've got a couple of other like bullet points I wanted to hit on, like how to avoid or bad bad experiences at the table. I think one of them I think we both experienced as a player would have been like the DM not really being comfortable, like confusing what he thought the rules would do, and then
If you're going to
play.
include special rules in a scenario,
Yeah,
have a very clear idea and do your due diligence on how
yeah,
you want them to go. And then when they make their appearance, so like we're talking about the man catcher incident.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So when the man catchers got busted out, at that point, it's not unreasonable for the game master to stop and
yeah,
say, "Hey, these dudes have weapons. They're if they successfully hit you, illustrate to the players how the mechanics are going to work. Right? They're going to grapple you, and then
yeah,
they're going to use their action to move you around, and like for instance, put you off a boat
yeah.
or
I think
push you
that.
down some stairs or something like that. So the players and you are on the same wavelength as to how things are going to go work. But when you do it on the fly, the players plan with situation A and then knew something situation B, the DM goes, well, that's not really the way it works.
Yeah,
And then the players were like, ooh.
I think if you, especially if you're playing with players who are experienced or have different expectations, don't be scared of like just stating you. There's two ways of approaching it. I would always start off with the narrative approach to it. So the example we had was obviously we were on a barge and these fishmen, not frogmen, came and had these man catchers and were trying to kidnap us. So have them get a crew member and like lift them up and throw them overboard, and then other frogmen come and swim them away or whatever. Rather than if you state that these are man catchers from the fifth edition rulebook, then the players who know what they then do will expect them to work that way. And if they have a question, say, "Oh, sorry, why I confused that. For this session, they're going to work in this way." So if you want to take that move back, that's
I mean,
fine.
I think that particular thing was they existed in previous editions. So with experienced players, they all have a different vision of how it works. I don't know
Yeah.
that they exist in 5th edition. They might, but but regardless,
Yeah, they
we were
applied restrained, and that didn't do what it was.
well. So we ended
Yeah,
up because the guy, yeah, he applied the restrained condition or what immobilized or whatever,
yeah,
and so we just took to whacking the person with the man catcher. And clearly, if the man catcher's like wrapped around your arms, that's not what the game master envisioned. But when he said, "Hey, this is what it was," inevitably the players thought outside the box and came up with the most beneficial solution for themselves. So then it became confrontational, and that was what not was a game master you're trying to achieve.
yeah,
So it's always best if you're going to take a few moments at the beginning to explain a mechanic, right? That like this is how it works.
yeah,
Then the players can have their, hey, well, what about this and what about this, and then you can make a ruling, and then you move forward with everybody having the same common shared sense of whatever is going on, right?
And I think one important thing I want to throw in here, I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you, so from this specific example, but had I been in that position, there's a very good chance that at some point I would have just switched to a narrative exposition of the party being swarmed by these groups and taking it out of the player's hand. If I've planned on this going this way and I need it to get there for specific story reasons, yeah, it's gonna turn into a train tracky kind of issue, and that'll put a downer on the player's experience. But I think that would be less of a downer than the confrontational and just that bad taste in your mouth of it. It feels like you're getting piled onto to try and force the outcome
Yeah,
when
in spite of what the game master's intention was, it became very us versus
yeah.
him versus us, and that
When
unravels very quickly, right?
yeah, when he holds the game master holds all of the tools.
Yes,
They have all of the cards.
yes.
The players only win when the GM plays fair, and they are under no obligation to play fair.
No, exactly, for sure.
So never be scared of pulling out the narrative exposition of what happened. If you want to get the party off a boat and into an undersea adventure, get them there. If the
For sure.
payoff at the end is going to be worth it, the players will forgive you for that in a heartbeat.
The players, and I think if you're going to play in a game master's game, you have to trust that the game master that he is doing his best to present his story, right? And that while some things may seem like you said train tracky or linear, uh, he's trying to because he's trying to get you past the point where like I think this topic has come up in the past where people said we're trying to get from here to here as the game master, and the players, because we played it out, felt that they were missing something, right? That there was a solution that they were missing. They got frustrated, and then it kind of unraveled, and really the game master was trying to get them to the point where they were captured, right? But because they kept playing it, the
Yeah,
players kept thinking, oh well, he doesn't want to capture us. There's something we're missing. There's a chance, the way to get out of it,
yeah.
something like that. So yeah,
And
you're
then suddenly the party's dead.
yeah, because they keep they keep fighting it out, and so in a lot of cases, a game master, it's not something you want to do too often, but absolutely, you're uh, to narrate, hey, this happens, and this is the situation you find yourself in.
Yeah.
And then
I
inevitably you'll have a player who will say, "Oh, well, I did this and what does that?" Okay, that's something that you certainly after the session you can sit down with that player and said, "Yes, I understand you took precautions and all that, but this is what we're trying to achieve, and I will try to remember that you do this, and like I set up a perimeter and I did this and that,
yeah,
because like you said, as a game master you hold all the cards,
yeah,
so no matter what the players did, the game master can hopscotch through all the preparation the players did, that just seems shafty.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do that too often. So, so
No,
that's why it's always suggested you avoid the, the sort of arbitrary, railroady, because it inevitably never works out.
yeah. But I think when it's again, so we might have a disagreement on this. It's fine. But I think I would have it in my back pocket for those situations where if my choice is now, well, we keep playing and this dragon is going, like Smaug is going to actually eat you all. Like you're Bilbo and you're trying to stab Smaug with Sting. Are you sure? Because I can just eat you at any point. I'm gonna. You can roll all the 20s you want. You're still not winning this fight.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Oh, get in!
That's
I crit the dragon. Good.
yeah.
You hit.
Well, it's the story we've, I don't know how many times I've told you this story, but the like I want to camp beside the undead village, right?
This is a good
Okay.
one, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so like the guy, he looked at the map and he's like, "What's that? That's Undead Village. I'm gonna go there." So he like set out at the wrong time of day so that just before night falls he gets to the village. So I'm like, "Okay, what's your plan?" "I'm just gonna make a camp." Okay. So he makes this camp. And then I'm like, "Okay, well you're dead, right?" You like went to this place called the Undead Village. It was filled with undead. Like it wasn't just sort of not. It was just somebody didn't just say it was. They, roam around the area. You were by yourself. You didn't set any guards. Well, I want to play it out. Okay. Well, like you wake up, there's like guys tearing apart your clothing and stuff like that. They gnaw on you and you're dead. Oh, then he felt much better after that. But I was like, what are you going to do? Like that. Sometimes your players were like, so then a day or so went by and he phoned me and he said, "Hey, can we just roll that back?" And I'm like, I don't think anything is good. Like I said, I would love to, but I think for whatever, we should probably just like start a new character and write that one off as like a very poor choice. And I mean,
Yeah.
that was in the old, that was a long time ago. That was in the very arbitrary days, right? Of it was more adversarial. But I mean, I think that the player made chronically bad choices. So I don't know that if I'd rolled it back and we'd replayed it, he probably would have found himself in the exact same situation, maybe even worse,
So
right?
I'm gonna camp outside of the undead village, but I'm gonna stay awake.
Yeah,
So I see the undead coming this time.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So now at the morning you have exhaustion 1 when you head into the undead village, and still the same outcome occurs because it's swarming with zombies and you can't get away. And you're just like, why did you go by yourself, right? Like what, there's just so many. There's just, you know this was the same player who got told, we were playing Dragonlance and he got told that there's this green dragon orb and there's a big ancient green dragon, and the dragon's like, if to prove that you actually trust me, if you stick your arm in my mouth, I will give you the dragon orb. And the dude's like, okay. So he stuck his arm in the dragon's mouth and the dragon bit his arm off. And he was like, well, he was just like speechless. And I was like, it's a green dragon. Like, I don't know what you're really expecting. I didn't think you would actually stick your arm in the dragon's mouth, right? I don't think that was bad DMing. That was bad playing and just bad session altogether. So, like, how to not play your session? Don't put the player in a position where he sticks his arm in the dragon's mouth. So then I felt really guilty. So I gave him. He eventually found this luck blade that had 1 wish left in it, but the sword had a personality that was aligned with what his character was. But he pissed the sword off so badly that the sword just wouldn't let him pick it up anymore. So he just argued with the sword all the time. So I'm going to put a mechanism in the game for him to get his arm back. But he agitated the personality of the sword to the point where the sword preferred the company of the like evil drow sorceress, and she just put the sword in her bag. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know what to say.
All you had to do was be nice to a sword and wish your arm back. Come on.
Yeah.
So that is that like tip number 3 then. Don't give your players the option. Like, two options of would you like to win or lose this scenario? Because inevitably they'll think that winning is the wrong choice.
Yeah. Well, I think that is an archetype of the player who wants to be the hero so bad, but they work overtime to achieve it, right? And really, there's much simpler ways, but they feel like, he wanted to go to the village so that he could defeat the village, which he hadn't really thought it out or anything like that. I don't know what his plan was. I don't think he knew what his plan was, but he wanted to come back and tell everybody, hey, I like cleared out the end of the village,
Yeah. So
right? Or hey, I got the dragon orb for us because the dragon tried to play a game with me, and I was courageous enough to stick my arm in the dragon's mouth, right? And the dragon didn't bite my arm off, and he gave me, and I outsmarted this ancient dragon, and now I've got. So he just and I was that's the player, and yeah, and that's somebody like as a game master, we played a lot
yeah.
with these type of players, and they can be enjoyable in your group, but as a game master, you'd be super cognizant that they're always on the edge of the cliff when it comes to throwing themselves over the edge trying to do something. And as a game master, you need to be pretty careful about that you don't put them in a situation where they think they
I
can do it all.
I think as a game master for me, it's a problem I ran into quite a lot when I first started trying to make my own content. Was when I'd pull references from my experiences, so a lot of them was like video game stuff,
Sure.
and I think back to like Resident Evil, where you click X to like explore something, and then it'll say like there's a button. Would you like to push it? And you can say no, but then nothing happens. So you're going to push yes, and then you complete the game. It's like, would you like to win? Yes, no.
But in the video game, you saved it before you began
No,
this now this potentially dangerous thing, and there's no save button in the in D&D,
but,
right? So when it goes inevitably badly, you can't just back it up and start again.
but it's not even so much that as like the text pops up on the game to say like you visually see something that seems odd. You go over to it, and then the text says, "Would you like to do this one specific thing? Yes or no?" I found that when I put my players in a position where there is a big red button, I never expect someone to sniff it.
Right.
Like, there's an infinite number of choices around there being this button. Like, I
But all it
chase.
takes is one of your players to push it. So there might be a whole group, might have 4 players, and 3 of them are like, there's no way we're pushing this button. But inevitably, there's always that one guy who wants to push the button, and it ends poorly for the rest of them, right? Yeah. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation because, well, it ends poorly. And
Yeah.
then everybody's like, what the hell? What were you doing? And he was all like, well, it was there. So I pushed it. And you're like, whoa. Whoa.
um, I don't know any other bits of advice, I suppose, from maybe a player side of it. What do you do as a player to try and avoid? Other than I suppose we've already touched on not hogging the limelight too much. I suppose one for me would be indecision. Sometimes making the wrong choice quickly is better than talking out for 20 minutes in like.
Yeah. I think a couple things. One is um, look at what the game master is presenting you. If if you don't have a clear choice, if you're like, but it's pretty evident that this is what the game master is intending, then it never hurts for you to advance the game master story by going along with what. Like if it really doesn't matter to you, it's in your advantage to push forward the game master's agenda and to see where it goes, because clearly that's where the game master has spent more preparation time.
So I do have one, in fact. If your game master draws out a map as a player, and there is an obvious encounter in the center of the map that they drew, and a path leading down the left hand side that is perfectly clear, and would let you just completely bypass the encounter. Don't be a douche. Go and do the encounter.
So which one of us was the douche and which one of us went to the middle?
I feel like we all went along and then doubled back because we realized that it was not the best approach to do this game any justice.
Something, yeah, no, yeah. And I think that is an example of, uh, like you said, if the game master draws out the map, something is going to happen. So often, that's why it's a good idea as a game master to draw out a map when nothing's going to happen. So the players really are not, it's not predictable. You just don't want to be predictable, right? So lots of times, like you go somewhere and the players are investigating it, I'll just pull out the map and just draw something. And then the players will be like, right? Yeah, so that it's not obvious that, I mean, that particular one, it's very intricate and all this stuff was laid out and all that. And unfortunately for the game master, he'd left this like 5-foot path along the side. So we were like, oh, well, clearly rather than fall into the like gaping maw that is going to be in the center here, we'll just circumvent your encounter by like going down this 5-foot path in the maze. And then you could just see how deflating that was.
I
And
mean,
that was,
ultimately, again, I suppose I'll give you the way I would handle that as a game master. There's two ways that you can handle this. As soon as you see what the players are doing, you get your pen and you add a boulder and say, this tree fell over, this rock fell, this path is now blocked.
it would have been interesting if
Yeah.
we'd gone down this 5-foot path on the outside and the encounter had happened there where he just pulled out another map and drew a bunch of stuff there, right? Because it became inherently obvious that was an unpredictable choice on his player's parts, but didn't meant that he needed, and everybody would have been like, whoa, we got 3/4 of the way down the path, and the orb that we found in the middle of the map was in the middle of this 5-foot path, just beyond our view originally, right?
Yeah, well, that was what I was coming on to. If you let the players make it too far along the path, so at the edge of your map, okay, so you guys are going to continue down this path, I'm assuming. Yeah, okay, well, lift up, rotate the map 90 degrees, and then plonk them on the side, so the path is now running the other direction, and the encounter's in front of them again.
So I think we've just talked about this. I think the error was drawing out the map instead of putting the players, where you're narrating to the players you're walking through the jungle, and you come to the edge of a pit and you can see an orb in front of you, and putting the players down at the encounter, rather than drawing the whole map and dumping the players on the corner of the map.
He let us pick our starting positions, I think was his crucial mistake. Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, that was just I don't know. I don't know.
I'm not going to say that we didn't take full advantage of the error, and a lot of that was potentially on us. But hey ho,
that game had become a really tactical game.
Yeah.
And so we were thinking sort of tactically when we got put in that situation where I think if that's the game you're going to run, you want to position the players, at the point of contact type thing, so that
you get the merch in order from them, but then you as a game master place the figures.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean that was obviously that is the quintessential set piece encounter that the players, and we could have still done it from there. We could just turn around and walked away.
Yeah.
So how do you? Yeah, so you have to incentivize the players to participate in the activity, right? So, like I don't know what it is. It depends on your group, but whatever you feel is going to be enough to motivate your group to do it, right? Then that's that. But I would avoid those type of encounters, to be 100% honest, just because we could have got through that whole thing narratively. Where it triggered, and then he drew the map, and we were at the bottom of the pit, right?
Yeah.
And then we had to fight our way out. That would have been
Yeah, it's as you said exactly for my example. If you put all of your players in front of a gem that's on the top of a stick, it doesn't matter how cautious the rest of the group is. One of the players is going to tell you that they take the gem.
Hmm. Yeah,
If there's no map drawn, someone is going to interact with that prop, and that's roll initiative type thing.
that triggers the encounter, and then you can draw your map, and then you're not.
I can't believe I said roll initiative when the name of the show is That's Initiative. Come on, Chris, get a grip.
Well, maybe you should change the title.
Brandon, I'm so bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, that's the issue, right? I think that that's something that happens where the game master, he was just trying to present a scenario. The players, because the game had become super tactical, were super cautious, and really it became a question of is whatever is going on there worth the trouble of us potentially, getting in and yeah
And so this is, I suppose, one last tangent for this, but I suppose I'll tie it in somewhat. In my opinion, the reason that encounter we we chose to try and not engage with it because it's not relevant to us. We'd been assigned a backstory effectively to our characters where we were all nobles and like quite high ranking. So none of us had any need for a gem.
right
We have the wealth of a nation behind us.
right
So don't put encounters in front of your players that aren't relevant to them.
right right yeah, or don't give them the option of choosing to engage or not engage with it. Put them into the
Yeah.
encounter, right, and then make them work their way out. So
Yeah.
that's a simpler solution rather than picking something to put there that's going to encourage the players. Just narrate it to the point where the encounter has begun, and like you said, then
Yeah.
and then then they're in it.
Yeah.
Somebody falls through the ground, we're in the pit, then then the scenario lays itself out. Yeah, I think that's that. So that was just a lesson learned from the game master. I think he learned that you don't want to like give your players. It's not a random encounter, right? Like if it's obviously was pre-plotted, and
Yeah.
his intentions was they were going to go through this, then dump the players in the middle of it, right, and then make them figure their way out. Don't give them the option to wander off because inevitably the players will do what you didn't want them to do.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that about covers that topic fairly well. So I had thought that we could. I had the idea for the next episode that we could talk about party composition and how you look at it from a game master perspective and how you do it as a player when you're trying to form a party. But given that we like touched on alignment and had that, so I might put a poll on the Dice Hate Facebook page, see which one people want us to talk about for the next episode, and go from there. But that's it from me. Really, do you have any closing
No,
points?
no, not at all.
Yeah,
Thanks everybody for joining us.
yeah. Thanks everyone. So you can watch a video on YouTube, or you can have this in audio format. It'll be available on Dice Hate on iTunes. Share that channel with my X-Wing podcast as well at the moment. If you want this to be its own thing, listen to it, leave us some feedback, and I'll look at setting it up as its own RSS feed. It'll also be posted on the website as well. But leave some comments, let us know, give us some feedback. We're still relatively new at this. I think this is our official episode 1, seeing as we didn't even have a title last time. I think my intro was me bumbling on about us doing something different. So, yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll catch you on the next one.